Have you ever wondered what lies beneath the surface of your favorite musicals? Would you believe me if I told you that modern 20th century composers used classical compositional techniques that have been used for hundreds of years? Throughout this video, I aim to explore 3 different musical devices used by 20th century composers to enhance plot lines in musicals. These devices often prove to be an integral part of the production, altering perceptions or foreshadowing circumstances. In Meredith Willson's 1957 Broadway hit, The Music Man, I will explore the idea of Sprechgesang, while in Leonard Bernstein's musical of the same year, West Side Story, we will look at harmonic intervals and resolutions. Lastly, in Stephen Sondheim's Sweeney Todd, we will dive into leitmotifs. If you've never seen any of these musicals before, be forewarned, I will be sharing some spoilers. But that's worth knowing the magic behind the music, right? The Music Man was written by Meredith Willson in 1957. To fully appreciate the Sprechgesang found in this play, it will help to have some knowledge of the plot. Set in the fictional quintessential American small town River City, Iowa in 1912, The Music Man follows Professor Harold Hill in his quest as a traveling salesman to sell the people of River City on the idea of a boys' band. Unbeknownst to him, Hill chose to solicit the most stubborn, suspicious, reserved people in the country.
And we're so by God stubborn we can stand touching noses for a week at a time and never see eye to eye.
After many encounters with the school board, the mayor and his wife, and other townspeople, the Iowans warm up to Hill and become excited about the prospect of a boys' band in town. As expected, Professor Harold Hill falls in love with the only person in town who has not learned to trust him. Marion, the town's librarian and the only musician around, doesn't take too kindly to Hill.
I am not as easily mesmerized as some of the people in this town, and I think it only fair to tell you that I am not impressed by your credentials, which I have not seen, nor your manners, which I have.
However, when Hill gets Marion's recluse brother involved in the boys' band, her worries subside and she begins to fall for the professor. The dramatic irony of this production is that Professor Harold Hill's boy band is a sham. Hill uses a revolutionary teaching method called the think system, which, allegedly, teaches the boys how to play their instruments simply by thinking the tune in their heads. Hill has no intention of ever starting a boys' band. He simply wants the people's money. Eventually, after weeks of hearing no music from their children, the townspeople arrest Hill and attempt to charge him with fraud. Even though he has been scamming people, he has also genuinely helped many people in River City. They give him one last chance by allowing the boys' band he created to perform. Knowing that he has not taught the kids one lick of music, Hill is frightened. But the parents find joy in the music the kids are playing, as only a parent could.
Now think, men. Think.
Throughout The Music Man, talk aspires to the condition of song. This musical device used by Willson is called Sprechgesang, which is understood as speech song. It is an operatic technique, a type of vocal enunciation intermediate between speech and song. Willson employs Sprechgesang several times in The Music Man, but the 2 most notable are Rock Island and Pick a Little, Talk a Little.
What are you waiting for?
Sprechgesang is notated as if it were a percussive melodic line. Rather than the individual pitches being notated precisely, the melodic contour is notated with X noteheads, and the performer simply follows that shape, giving the Sprechgesang direction and continuity. In Rock Island, the musical's opening scene, a horde of traveling salesmen are on a train having a conversation about the hardships of their profession. Here, Willson employs Sprechgesang to musically portray the train. The score dictates, train starts, and following is in exact rhythm to checking of train, starting very slowly and picking up speed as a train does. This is clearly heard at the start of the number.
Cash for the merchandise. Cash
for the button hooks.
Cash for the cotton goods, cash for the hard goods.
Cash for the fancy goods. Cash for the soft goods.
Cash for the noggins and the piggins and the frickin's.
Cash for the hogshead, cask, and demijohn. Cash for the crackers and the pickles and the fly paper.
Look, what do you talk? What do you talk? What do you talk? What do you talk? What do you talk?
Where do you get it?
What do you talk? You can talk, you can talk. You can bigger, you can talk. You can bigger, bigger, bigger. You can talk, you can talk. You can talk, 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 talk. Bigger, bigger, bigger. You can talk all you want, but it's different than it was.
No, it ain't, but you gotta know the territory.
Why, it's a Model T Ford. Made the trouble, made the people want to go, want to get up and go. 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 22, 23 miles to the county seat.
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Who's gonna patronize a little bitty 2x4 kind of store anymore?
The end of Rock Island is similar to the beginning, but in reverse. As the train slows down, the tempo of the Sprechgesang decreases, and we hear many S consonants to represent the locomotive letting off steam. At the end, one of the salesmen exclaims, "But he doesn't know the territory," mimicking the sound of the train's whistle.
Well, I don't know much about bands, but I do know you can't make a living selling big trombones. No, sir. Mandolin picks, perhaps, and here and there a Jew's harp.
No, the fella sells bands, boys' bands. I don't know how he does it, but he lives like a king, and he dallies, and he gathers, and he plucks, and he shines. And when the man dances, certainly, boys, what else? The piper pays him. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. When the man dances, certainly, boys, what else? The piper pays him. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But he doesn't know the territory.
Similarly, Wilson uses Sprechgesang in Pick a Little, Talk a Little, one of my favorite musical numbers of all time. I love the song so much because of the way Wilson uses Sprechgesang to portray something that all of us have thought at one time or another.
Do you know I have a feeling she likes the idea?
Deanna Keller, in an article on Feminine Collective, talks about working in an office dominated by women, saying, "Each morning, as you approach an enclosed area, you are greeted by sounds that are best described as clucking. Unless they are asleep or sick, there is always someone flapping about something in the henhouse. Whether it is the latest bit of gossip or grumbling about spouse and kids, there is always chatter going on. Whether the clucking comes from a hen or a woman, the tone, volume, and dialect can tell those who are happy, mellow, or downright cranky." The term clucking hen has become vernacular for gossiping or complaining women, and Wilson does an incredible job of incorporating the two.
He must have picked him out the first crack out of the box.
Talking up to a man like that.
He wouldn't take and talk up about her.
He didn't take and try turkey talking to him, brazen.
No, to take her ticket and punch it for her.
Picked her out first crack like a cheap jack. Not much pick to her, if you ask me.
Pick a little, talk a lot. Pick a little, talk a little.
Cheap, cheap, cheap.
Talk a lot, pick a little more.
Pick a little, talk a little, pick a little, talk a little, cheap, cheap, cheap. Talk a lot, pick a little more. Pick a little, talk a little, pick a little, talk a little, cheap, cheap, cheap. Talk a lot, pick a little more. Pick a little, talk a little, pick a little, talk, cheap, cheap, cheap. Talk a lot, pick a little more. Pick a little, talk a little, pick a little, talk a little, cheap, 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 cheap. Professor, her kind of woman doesn't belong on any committee. Of course, I shouldn't tell you this, but she advocates dirty books.
Dirty books?
Chaucer, Rabelais,
Balzac.
and the worst thing, of course, I shouldn't tell you this,
I'll tell.
the man lived on my street. Let me tell.
So.
As you can see, the way the women are controlling their voices, staying between talking and singing, encourages a clucking sound. It gives much more depth to the storyline, giving us a visual and oral representation of something we've all imagined in our heads. There is one scene in The Music Man that turned Sprechgesang on its head. Professor Harold Hill is being hunted by the school board, and when he hears them all talking consecutively, he realizes that their voices are perfectly paired for a barbershop quartet. In the previously mentioned songs, Wilson uses spoken singing to enhance the plotline, but in this scene, Professor Harold Hill brings Sprechgesang full circle by teaching the school board that singing is simply sustained speaking.
Just a minute, Professor Hill. Sorry, Professor, but we're the school board, and we need your credentials.
Academic certificates?
Nothing of the kind.
We need letters and papers.
Make him put up a bond.
What am I hearing? You, sir.
Say ice cream. Well, ice cream, but I don't sing if that's what you mean.
Talk then.
Down here, ice cream. Ice cream. Talk slow. Ice cream.
You see? Singing is just
sustained talking.
Now you, sir.
Ice cream.
Now you, sir.
Ice cream.
Now you, sir.
Ice cream.
Interestingly, Google translates Sprechgesang from German to chant in English. The English definition of chanting is to say something repeatedly in a sing-song tone, so we attribute chanting to monotone, elongated speaking. But we get the word chant from the French word chanter, which means to sing.
You watch your phraseology.
West Side Story was written by Leonard Bernstein in 1957. It takes place in the Upper West Side of New York City in the mid-1950s, and it tells a modern-day version of Romeo and Juliet in which people associated with opposing gangs, the Jets and the Sharks, fall in love. Bernstein makes great use of the tritone in West Side Story. In fact, the tritone is used so often that after a while it fails to grab our attention. The tritone is named such because it is an interval of 3 whole tones, dividing a span of an octave in 2 equal parts. In the early 18th century, it was given the name Diabolus in Musica, which is Latin for the devil in music. Can you believe anything in music could be equated to the devil?
You're not making a joke.
I have not yet learned how to joke that way.
The tritone was rejected by composers until the late Baroque and Classical eras, but even then it was used sparingly and in a very controlled way. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that composers began to use the tritone freely without functional limitations. However, it remains to this day a dissonant interval. In West Side Story, Bernstein uses the tritone to represent the ever-present hatred between the Sharks and the Jets. The opening number, Jet Song, is riddled with tritones, beginning with solo melodic lines and progressing into thicker orchestration. In fact, the first interval we hear is a tritone, simple and pure. After we've been introduced to this interval, we hear it incorporated into a melodic line with simple accompaniment. It is worth mentioning that in these examples, the tritone does not resolve. However, Maren Alsop, conductor of the Baltimore Symphony, describes the tritone as an interval that requires a resolution, and without resolution, it just hangs there and makes you feel uncomfortable. Because of this, when the tritone is resolved, it creates one of the most satisfying harmonic resolutions. Bernstein knew this and used the unresolved tritone to create a jarring harmony that mirrors the conflict to come in the play. What is perhaps the most famous tritone of all time is found in West Side Story. Tony, a jet, has just met Maria, the sister of a shark. He sings her name, a tritone resolving up to the perfect fifth.
All the beautiful sounds of the world in a single word. Maria, 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 Maria. I've just met a girl named Maria.
The dissonance is there only for a moment before it resolves. Tony's optimistic jump from the tritone seems to brush away any unharmonic sounds, but the tritone is still present, representing the fact that their love will always be tinged with the hatred of their feuding friends and family. Likewise, in the Cool Fugue, Bernstein uses the resolved tritone to mask the hatred and intensity hiding beneath the surface. The Jets are heated and ready to fight, but Riff, the Jets' leader, urges them to keep cool.
Boy, boy, crazy boy, get cool, boy. Got a rocket in your pocket, keep coolly cool, boy.
Bernstein uses the tritone to tie the entire musical together, but the interval itself tells a story, and it adopts different meanings in different situations. Sophia Rizzi from Classic FM suggests that Bernstein leaves the tritone unresolved to hint at violence and danger looking around the corner, but he resolves it to indicate optimism. As I mentioned earlier, Bernstein uses tritones so frequently that we grow numb to their harshness. Because of this, the strikingly beautiful sounds of perfect intervals grab our attention in West Side Story the way a dissonance such as the tritone would in any other instance. The tritone is noticeably absent from the love duet Tonight, sung between Maria and Tony. Instead, the ballad is littered with perfect intervals to suggest that their love is pure, and the hatred of the outside world cannot penetrate it. During this song, the stage directions read, "Now the buildings in the world fade away, leaving them suspended in space." The floating nature of this ballad suggests a dreamlike state. The sweetness of the consonants is almost overpowering. We are left to believe that their love and a happily ever after are too good to be true.
Tonight, the world is full of light, with suns and moons all over the place. Tonight, tonight, the world is wild and bright, going mad, shooting sparks into space.
Perhaps one of the most intriguing ways Bernstein uses the tritone in West Side Story is at the very end. We know the play is over, yet Bernstein leaves us feeling as if there is more to the story, leaving the tritone unresolved. It almost feels like he wanted to trick the audience into feeling some kind of resolution, because after interrupting a C major chord twice with the F sharp in the bass, Bernstein indicated that he wants the third iteration of the C major chord to be held longer than the others before interrupting it with the tritone. Interestingly, the producers of the film adaptation of West Side Story did not feel like the ending was appropriate. Instead, they end the movie on the C major chord, the third iteration, without a tritone interruption. I found that the film as a whole migrated away from the original score most of the time. Sweeney Todd was written by Stephen Sondheim in 1979 and was set in 1846 London. Todd, a barber, was wrongfully sent to prison in Australia so a malicious judge could have Lucy, Todd's wife, all to himself. Upon Todd's return, he learns that his wife poisoned herself so she wouldn't have to marry the judge. Desperate, alone, and broken-hearted, Sweeney Todd takes up his old residence above Mrs. Lovett's meat pie bakery and reopens his barbershop.
Go on!
My, you do like a good story, don't you?
In order to get back at the judge that stole his wife and sent him to Australia, Todd begins slitting the throat of patrons of his barbershop, people who will not be missed, waiting for the day when the judge will be in for a trim. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lovett bakes his victims into her meat pies. One day, Todd retreats to his shop to find a deranged, homeless beggar woman inside. Having no patience for her, he slit her throat and sent her body to the kitchen. His next and final victim of the blade was the judge. In the final scene, we learn that Mrs. Lovett had not told the whole truth about Todd's wife, Lucy. She indeed poisoned herself, but she did not die. She simply became a deranged, homeless beggar woman. In that moment, Todd realizes he's made a fatal mistake by killing the beggar woman, his wife, Lucy. His anger towards Mrs. Lovett explodes, and he throws her into the oven where she burns to death. Isn't that a cheery story? Let's get to the music, shall we?
Ready? Ready?
Ready.
British musicologist Arnold Whittall defines a leitmotif as a theme or other coherent musical idea, clearly defined so as to retain its identity if modified on subsequent appearances, whose purpose is to represent or symbolize a person, object, place, idea, state of mind, supernatural force, or any other ingredient in a dramatic work. In Sweeney Todd, Sondheim gives each character a distinguishable leitmotif. Todd's is ominous and foreboding.
There's a hole in the world like a great black pit, and it's filled with people who are filled with shit, and the vermin of the world inhabit it.
It is distinguishable each time it returns. The eighth note pattern is clearly recognizable, and many of the iterations of Todd's leitmotif contain the shrill factory whistle. Mrs. Lovett's motif is peppy and cheery, but begins with a minor seventh, what we consider a sad, dissonant interval.
Ah, customer! What you rush, what you hurry? You gave me such a fright, I thought you was a ghost. Half a minute, can't you sit you down, sit. All I meant is that I haven't seen a customer for weeks. Did you come in for a pie, sir?
This motif is used continuously throughout the play whenever Mrs. Lovett speaks to Sweeney Todd. In Act 2, Mrs. Lovett teases Todd with kisses and guessing games using the same minor seventh interval and similar melody.
Oh, Mr. Todd. I'm so happy I could eat you up, I really could. You know what I'd like to do, Mr. Todd? What I dream, if the business is good, where I'd really like to go in a year or so. Don't you want to know?
Of course.
Do you really want to know?
Yes, I do.
During Mrs. Lovett and Sweeney Todd's first duet, My Friends, the 5th number of the play, Todd is singing to his razors while Mrs. Lovett sings to Todd. Even then, we hear the same motif, but this time it is rhythmically augmented.
You there, my friend.
I'm your friend too,
Come,
Mr.
let
Todd.
me hold
If you only knew,
now,
Mr. Todd.
with a sigh, you grow warm in my hand, my friend, my clever friend.
Yes, for you I did.
Interestingly, Sondheim gave the chorus its own leitmotif. Each time we hear this motif, we innately know that the chorus is giving us new information, narrating the play. And even within the chorus, each character, though singing the same melody, has their own submotifs because of the range of their voice. But perhaps the most high-level motivic writing Sondheim produces is that of the beggar woman. When we first meet her, she is begging for money on the streets of London. Her motif is clearly dominated by minor seconds. Sondheim uses this motif to do some serious foreshadowing. A few songs later, we hear Todd sing about his devastation over losing his wife, Lucy.
And my Lucy lies in ashes, and I'll never see my girl again.
Do you hear all the minor seconds? Those minor seconds belong to the beggar woman's motif. How are they in Lucy's as well? We learn at the end of the play that it is because they are indeed the same person. But Sondheim doesn't assume that you'll pick that foreshadowing up on the first try. He gives you several opportunities to figure it out. After the judge ships Todd off to Australia, he kidnaps Lucy and takes her to a masked ball at his home. When she arrives, the guests are dancing to this minuet. Right before she is killed, when inside Mr. Todd's barbershop, the beggar woman has a flashback to her time living in that room. She remembers where her daughter's crib had been, and in her delusion picks up a baby that doesn't exist and sings to it. The song she sings is the same minuet that was played at the judge's ball. Even in this minuet, we hear Lucy's half-step motif. The culmination of all this is when Todd discovers he has killed his wife. In this scene, we get 3 leitmotifs, those of Lucy, Mrs. Lovett, and Sweeney Todd. As Mrs. Lovett sings to Todd, she apologizes using her motif. While the minor seventh isn't presented in a single interval as before, the range of this melody spans that of a minor seventh, proving that her minor seventh motif is still there. Todd, in despair, sings to Lucy in hers.
No one ever lied, such a triple poison she did. Never said that she died. Poor thing, she lived but enough to weak in the head. What she did for us was just lie there in bed. Should have been in hospital, wound up in bedlam instead. Poor thing, but I used to think she was dead. Yes, I love you. I'd be twice the way she was. I love you. What have I done?
And once Mrs. Lovett has been thrown into the oven, Todd retreats back to Lucy, and we hear his own ominous motif once again. As you can see, in Sweeney Todd, Sondheim uses leitmotifs as more than just a character identifier. He uses them to propel the plot and foreshadow what's to come. What surprised me most during my research for this presentation was how deep the musical characteristics went. Even as a musician, Someone keenly aware of classical compositional techniques and musical devices, I kept unraveling layers and layers of hidden gems in these scores. The speech song in The Music Man presented itself many more times than the two I mentioned. West Side Story is saturated with tritones, both intervallic and in key relationships. Sweeney Todd could tell itself without words, simply using leitmotifs. When you take the time to dive deep into the minds of the composers and analyze the techniques used, it can really make the movie's characters and plotline blossom into a magical work that is even more awe-inspiring than you could have ever imagined.